don't go shut down, right? Arrested. Welcome back. It's the No House Advantage NFL Strategy Show as we get you ready for Thursday night football. Couple of bigger name teams. We'll see if the game lives up to it as we're dealing with COVID striking once again, in this case, more so on the sidelines than actually on the field. But we have a lot to factor in. The good news is that you don't have to lock anything in quite yet on No House Advantage. We're going to force Greg Ehrenberg, however, to lock a couple of plays in early on as we're back to look at this Thursday night game. Tyler is producing. Make sure you say hi in the chat after you hit that thumbs up button and you are subscribed. Greg, how are you, my friend?
Doing better than these players because we've got almost it looks like we got a quarterback change coming for the Saints. And then in terms of players, Alvin Kamara, Mark Ingram, neither of them played last week. They're both officially questionable. Then you look at the wide receiver core and we've got Amari Cooper. He's questionable to play for Dallas, although it seems like a lot of these guys are trending in the direction of playing. But yeah, once again, another Thursday night game where we've got a pretty extensive injury report.
It seems like it's every week. And granted, I get it, short week, and it's going to lend the nature of this game anyway. Guys are going to be hurt. But I feel like even a day before the game actually kicks, you and I are talking about a ton of scenarios where it's like, hey, if player A plays, you do this. If player B's out, and it's always compounded into almost a parlay of circumstances.
Yeah, well, one thing that's good, at least, though, for this game is that both these teams played on Thanksgiving. So it's actually not a short week for either of them. It just doesn't apparently matter when it comes to the injury report.
All right, man. So we've got a couple of different positions, as we always do, to go through and use that promo code. If you're just joining us, it's above Greg's head there. It's Awesemo, AWESEMO. You put in 25 and we'll match 25 as well on No House Advantage. Let's look at running backs and definitely the bigger names here across the board. We still have Kamara as questionable. Ingram is locked in here, but again, we have to wait and see what happens more so with Kamara. Let's start with Dallas. At least we have some clarity there from a health standpoint. We have Ezekiel Elliott and Tony Pollard. The numbers are a little different. So let's start with Zeke, 60.5 rushing yards, a half rushing touchdown, essentially yes or no for a rushing touchdown. Either of those jump out at you?
A little bit on the over for rushing yards. We haven't projected for 65.5. And then something else to consider is just, look at the game script of this game. The Saints, they look terrible on Thanksgiving. They're also pretty banged up right now. Taysom Hill likely going to be starting quarterback. Simeon was a total disaster in the time that he was at quarterback, especially last week. But ultimately, I do think the Cowboys are the better team. They're favored in this spot, even though they're on the road. So I think this sets up pretty well from be running the ball in the fourth quarter. So it's not a line that's massively off, but just because of what the game script is, give me Ezekiel Elliott. And then, sorry, one more point. I thought I was going to wrap it up there, but there was one more thing that came to me. Is last week we saw a little bit of a reduction in workload for Ezekiel Elliott, but he was dealing with a sore knee. They had just played on Sunday, and they're playing again on Thursday. He now has the full week off. Like we said at the top of the show, even though this is a Thursday night game, both of these teams played last Thursday, so it's the full week off. So I expect Zeke to be healthier this week than he was last week. It's going to be the over on his rushing yards.
All right, so we also have Tony Pollard, who has been a factor in the offense no matter what's going on with Zeke, if Zeke's out there or not. And you mentioned the game script is definitely going to play into this role here. And I love how casually and accurately you just throw Trevor Siemian into the dumpster because it was brutal to see that. With that said, Tony Pollard, a little bit more manageable in the rushing yards, 45.5 rushing yards. Looking at it, he's been hovering around that number, probably more so on average than not last couple of games. Receiving yards, this is one we can work with here that we didn't have with Zeke, is 15.5. He's gone over that 4 straight games I'm looking at.
Yeah, so I think the rushing yards is pretty accurate, but give me the over for Tony Pollard on the receptions. Now, receiving yards, so this is maybe not the best game script for them to have to throw the ball to Tony Pollard, but like you said, he's kind of been involved in that part of the game regardless anyway. They use him more in the passing game than they do Zeke, and then something else with Tony Pollard also. He's so explosive and such a big play threat that he might hit the over on just one reception, which is also something. If you look at the last 4 weeks, he's had catches of 32 yards, 19 yards, 14, 30. So, it's pretty realistic to think he could have 120-yard catch that's going to hit the over there. Also, like you said, he's been over that number in recent weeks. The last 4 games, 32, 20, 56, 32 receiving yards. And then even weeks before that, 22, 28 with a 1-yard receiving game mixed in there. So Tony Pollard has been hitting the over basically every single game over the last month and a half. So I think that number's too low.
I'm curious, before we even look at numbers, what do you anticipate is going to happen with Alvin Kamara?
I think he probably plays. He practiced yesterday. He hadn't been practicing recently. I didn't see an update yet for today, and maybe that would change my opinion. But at least as of now, I still have to take the questionable tag seriously. I think he's more likely to play than sit, but I think that Taysom Hill is going to have a pretty significant impact on Kamara at the same time.
All right, so let's look at that. Now we have 4 different ways in which we can attack Kamara. And again, we remind you each and every week here, you can only choose one. So follow Greg's advice here on which has a little bit more room for you to work with as opposed to, and again, we have projections on site. Alex and company have built up everything for no house advantage in these tournaments here. So use them by all means. Kamara's at 45.5 rushing yards, 25.5 receiving yards. We also have him at 3.5 receptions and the yes or no a half for a rushing, not anytime, but rushing touchdown.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting looking numbers there. And by the way, we need to know that Alvin Kamara is in. None of this matters if he doesn't play.
Sure.
If he doesn't move. Yeah, exactly. If he's out, just to remind everybody, something that Eytan and I bring up pretty commonly when we do the show every week is no house advantage. Just because somebody's out, it doesn't mean the unders are a win. They're a loss if somebody's out. It's the equivalent of somebody scoring anybody out. Yeah, no, it's the equivalent of 0 fantasy points in a DFS lineup. So don't play him in any sort of situation if he's out here. Now, if he's in, that's a really low rushing yard number. And the receptions, it would seem low at first glance, but you have to go back to last year when Taysom Hill was the quarterback. And by the way, I'm assuming Taysom Hill is going to be starting quarterback for the Saints this week. So far, we have seen Simeon take the reps with the backup squad, and then the starters, Taysom Hill's been practicing with them. So that would lead me to think that it's going to be Alvin Kamara who is the starting running back. Now, if you go back to last year, when Taysom Hill was the starting quarterback for the Saints, Kamara was barely getting targeted in the passing game. We see the stretch from weeks, I don't know the exact weeks, but November 22nd, November 29th, December 6th. These were all games that Taysom Hill started at quarterback. In those games, Alvin Kamara, 1 target, 0 receptions, 2 targets, 1 reception, 3 targets, 2 receptions. This was just not something that was part of Taysom Hill's repertoire. So assuming that he's going to be the starting quarterback, I like the under for receptions for Alvin Kamara. In terms of the rushing yards, I think we take the over there as well, just because the number is so low and they're going to want to get Alvin Kamara touches. If they're not going to be coming in the passing game, it's going to come on the ground. So I like the over for the rushing yards. I like the under for the receptions.
All right, so we only have one prop here for Ingram, who's technically questionable, listed at least on the NHA tournament here as well. So all of this is contingent on health. But let's look at Ingram, assuming he's playing clearly. But we have basically 2 ways, pardon me, Greg, to look at this. It's 35.5 rushing yards. So you have the over under there, but it's also 35.5 rushing yards over under if Kamara's playing or if Kamara's out. And I'm sure that's going to drastically impact whether or not you're playing this prop.
Yeah, and I think this is a really simple value proposition. If Kamara's in, I love the under there. We currently have Mark Ingram projected for 17 rushing yards. That's assuming right now in our projections that Kamara and Ingram both play. Now, if Kamara is out, I would expect Mark Ingram to be projected somewhere in the neighborhood of like 70 rushing yards. He's been somebody who's played a massive role in the couple of games that he's been starting a running back and Kamara has been out. So really simple one. I'm going to like a Mark Ingram prop, assuming he's in, because like we said, he's also officially questionable, expected to play though. But if Alvin Kamara is out, look at the overs for Mark Ingram. If Alvin Kamara is in, look at the unders for Mark Ingram.
Let's move to the quarterback spot. We have a bunch of wide receivers to get to, and thankfully, there aren't any Mac Hollins scenarios here that we have to justify in here. But let's talk about the quarterback spot. We'll get the easy one out of the way first, and that's Dak Prescott. No surprises here. Health pending, of course. He's also, for those following along on NHA, you'll see the questionable tag there. Expected to go the 290.5 passing yards, 2.5 passing touchdowns, and the yes/no prop at 0.5 interceptions. Any of these, Greg?
Yeah, so I think the under for passing yards looks good. I think the under for touchdowns also looks good, but I lean more towards the under for passing touchdowns. It's a really high number, 2.5. And also, we talked about the reasons like the over on rushing yards for Zeke Elliott earlier. It's because this game script ultimately sets up favorably for the Cowboys to be running the ball. So Dak Prescott, if you look at sports books where there is going to be juice, You could be looking at Dak Prescott under 2.5 touchdowns is like minus 220, minus 240, something like that. Here, we're just looking at a yes or no proposition. So Dak Prescott, I do like the under for passing yards, but I'm much stronger. I have a preference towards the under for touchdowns, and we can only take one for each guy. So when I was looking at Alvin Kamara, there was a few that I liked, and I think you can mix in different ones. But for Dak Prescott, I would just be sticking with the under for 2.5 passing touchdowns.
Now we have 3 here to work with when it comes to Taysom Hill, and all lower numbers, as you can imagine, except maybe the touchdowns here. 190.5 for passing yards. It's going to be difficult outside of that stretch where he was throwing. I mean, he didn't really have much where he was throwing consistently recently at all. So you've got 190.5 passing yards. You've got the 1.5 passing touchdowns and the 0.5 interception here. To be fair, he only have 1 interception. Not that he's thrown the ball a ton, but he only has 1 interception all year.
Yeah, I don't expect that to uphold because I mean the reason it's easy to not throw interceptions. We don't throw the football, right? So Taysom Hill this year, how many pass attempts does he have this year? 8, yeah. So pretty crappy ratio there. But let's go back to last year. And last year, Taysom Hill didn't throw that many interceptions last year. 2 interceptions on 121 attempts. Like you said, this year, 8 on 1. For his career, he has 142 pass attempts. He's thrown 4 interceptions. We haven't projected for 0.77 interceptions. I certainly have to think he's more likely to throw an interception than not in this spot. Taysom Hill, not a prolific passing quarterback. He's capable of running the football. Would have definitely been interested to see any kind of rushing props that we would potentially have there, but it looks like that's not going to be a choice here. Yeah. The passing yards, that's such a low number. It's not that hard to hit the over, but he's such a poor passer that it's really hard for me to buy into it. So give me the over 0.5 interceptions. That appears to be the one most likely to hit.
I'm curious, what do you think the ceiling would be for attempts in a game script that I'm totally subscribing to the one that you laid out earlier, which is the Cowboys are up. They're definitely in a position to run this game out, especially on Thursday Night Football. Not a short week for them in this case, but they're still on the road here. What's the ceiling you think for attempts for Hill? 25? Like, I would be absolutely floored if we saw a game tonight, or Thursday night, where Taysom Hill's throwing for 38 times, something, even if they're down 14 to 17 points.
It's funny you bring up the 38 number. How many pass attempts would you guess that Taysom Hill had in his last start at quarterback?
Last start?
Yeah, start at quarterback.
Now I feel like it's weighted, so I'm going to guess 38.
It is 38, and the team was the Philadelphia Eagles. This is information you should have been equipped with.
Well, they beat the Eagles.
No, they lost to the Eagles.
Oh, that was the Taysom Hill start game. I thought that. You see, I blacked a lot of last year out. When you go 4-12, right? So yes.
Yeah, well, that was one of the Eagles' wins, was they beat the Saints with Taysom Hill starting quarterback. But yeah, Taysom Hill threw the ball 38 times in that game. So in terms of what's the actual ceiling, yeah, I think we could potentially see Taysom Hill throw the ball a bunch of times in this game if the Cowboys are ahead.
All right, so let's move on. We've got a couple there to pick from, and really for Prescott, it was much easier of a decision. Now we have a bunch of wide receivers, and again, depending on where you want to work on this, we only have 7 slots in the NFL. It's not like the NBA where you get those extra 3 slots to work with. So from 7 down to 1, depending on how confident you are here at this position. Let's tackle Dallas first. We'll hit New Orleans next, because again, I think the Saints just present a little more difficulty, or a little trickier per se with the quarterback spot. Cedric Wilson is first up, Gallup and Lamb. So it's going to get easier as we go here. Wilson's at 20.5 receiving yards, only 1.5 receptions. Reception seems a little tricky, but receiving yards seems a little low.
I think it's a little high, especially if Amari Cooper is going to be back. Yeah, because I mean, if we're going to have a full receiving core available for the Dallas Cowboys, then you're looking at CeeDee Lamb, Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup, and Dalton Schultz all getting targets over Cedric Wilson. Then, not to mention, I would be surprised if Zeke Elliott and Tony Pollard also get more targets than Cedric Wilson. So it's a low number, and I'm usually a little hesitant to be confident in a low number. But and once again, we need updates on the Cowboys receivers. It's assumed right now by me that Amari Cooper is going to be playing. If that changes and Amari Cooper's out, then I would look at this differently. But assuming he's in, yeah, give me the under on Cedric Wilson there.
All right, on both, right? 20.5 or just the receiving yards?
I would say for receiving yards, I mean, it's easy to get to 2 catches, although I guess for the low receiving yard total as well. But yeah, I think the receiving yards looks a little more favorable.
Okay. Gallup is going to be in a similar situation, except that he's expected to be a little bit more involved, even with the return of everybody there. So his numbers, understandably, would bump up, and they're at 50.5 receiving yards, 3.5 receptions. So based on how you laid out with Wilson, they've extended this a little bit here for Gallup, but still may be difficult to get to 50.5 receiving yards with all the targets going around.
Yeah, and the other thing, too, I think we have to talk about when we're just looking at odds of a player being over or under their projection. We have Michael Gallup projected for right around 50 yards, but you have to keep in mind the kind of game that Michael Gallup plays. So Gallup could be projected for an average of 50 receiving yards, but because his numbers are so variant, that means for Michael Gallup, you're going to get games like here are his last 3 games: 106 receiving yards, 44, 42. And that's kind of what you're going to see from Michael Gallup is he's either going to go under his number or go way over, but the percentage of time that he goes under that number is more likely than the over. So it doesn't matter if Michael Gallup goes out. I mean, it matters obviously in terms of win-loss. If Michael Gallup has 106 receiving yards or if Michael Gallup has 70 receiving yards, it's the same result in terms of the over-under on the number here. And just because he's going to be under that number more often than below because of the way that his games are distributed, I think it makes sense to go with the under for Gallup.
Yeah, I agree. Any interest in going under that? It's again 3.5, 2.5. I'd stay away from 3.5 though, just to get 4 receptions for Gallup in this game as a whole. Any interest going under there?
Not really. I mean, we've seen him now 4 games this year. He's gone over 4 or more in 3 of them. This is a little bit of a different situation because we do think that the Cowboys are going to be fully healthy, but I feel a little bit better about the under for the receiving yards and the receptions.
Lamb has been bumped up now significantly from as we've gone in order here. Everybody else, he's at 75.5 receiving yards, 5.5 receptions. So we don't have Cooper on the board here. We only have Lamb really, and then Gallup, and to a far lesser extent Wilson. So again, 75.5 receiving yards, 5.5 receptions for Lamb.
Yeah, so I'm going to start by saying this once again. We need an update on Amari Cooper officially before we actually know who is going to be the guys to look at. But it does appear that CeeDee Lamb, Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup are all going to be playing together. And I believe that we've not had a game all season where all 3 of them finished the game. I think the one game where Michael Gallup was healthy earlier in the year, he ended up getting hurt during that game. And then as the season moved on, Gallup finally came back. Then Cooper was out, Lamb was out. So we're finally going to see this Dallas Cowboys team with a full allotment of receivers for Dak Prescott to throw the ball to. With that in mind, I have a slight lean towards the under on receiving yards for CeeDee Lamb as well. It's just there's so many weapons in this offense. Lamb, Cooper, Gallup, Schultz, Elliott, Pollard's going to be involved in the passing game. That I think it's maybe a little bit too many mouths to feed for us to think that more often than not, Lamb hits the over there. So under here, but lower confidence interval.
Real quick, I'm with you as well that clearly Cooper is trending towards playing, but stranger things have happened. If Cooper is out, who do you go to immediately that benefits of the 3 exponentially from Cooper's absence?
Probably Cedric Wilson, just because the number is so low and he'd be on the field more. I mean, 20.5, that's a number that I think is too high with everybody healthy, but then you start to take guys out of the picture and then Cedric Wilson gets those extra routes to run.
That makes a lot of sense. And that's why I wanted to clarify that, because I think a lot of people may go right to CeeDee Lamb and say, oh, wow, let's pound overs here. But you're right. Much more manageable with lower numbers for Wilson. Deonte Harris, we've got Harris, Smith, and Callaway to look at here. And then the tight ends, of course, where we end. Let's start with Deonte Harris, 35.5 receiving yards, 2.5 receptions. We're still dealing with the quarterback situation. And all 3 of these guys on the NHA tournament here that we're looking at have Q tags next to them as well.
So you said, was it 2.5 receptions for Deonte Harris or 3.5?
Yep, 2.5 for Harris receptions, 35.5 receiving yards.
You know, it's so tough because it's difficult to trust Taysom Hill as a starting quarterback here. But with that said, Deonte Harris has pretty regularly been getting decent amount of targets in recent games. Last 4 games now, 5 targets, or I'll go 6 games. 5 targets, 4 targets, 8 targets, 7 targets. That's a healthy amount of looks that he's getting. Does that change with Taysom Hill as the quarterback? Perhaps. But still, it's low numbers, so I'll feel okay about the over for the receptions just because I don't think that target share is going anywhere.
Okay. What about Traquan Smith? We're at 40.5 receiving yards. Same number for receptions. at 2.5. Just want to make sure that Callaway, all three of these guys, just so you know, are at 2.5 receptions. So I'll remind you again when we get to Callaway, but just something to think about. Smith now has been bumped up a little bit. He's at 40.5 receiving yards.
So we haven't projected for the over. We haven't projected for 3.29 catches, but I think this is more of a stay away for me, especially because if we think about how Taysom Hill plays quarterback, remember last year when he was at QB, he was targeting Michael Thomas a ton over the middle. He was throwing these little 3-4 yard slants to him. So Michael Thomas would come away with games where he'd get targeted like 15 times. He'd have 11 catches for like 60 yards. And it was good for PPR points and all that. But he didn't have the most upside in the world. And that is something I think Deonte Harris maybe could do, as a smaller slot receiver. We could see a kind of similar type role. Maybe they'll run design screenplays to him. But Traquan Smith is a little more reliant on getting the ball downfield. And that's not really what Taysom Hill is good at. So we have these numbers projected a little bit on the over for Smith, but I can't trust it with Hill at QB.
All right. Finally, Callaway. Again, you're trusting Hill here, and that's the biggest thing. Same number for receptions, 30.5 receiving yards.
It's going to be another stay away for me. Marquez Callaway, another guy that's more of a downfield threat. And I think that if I had to guess who's going to get the most targets in the Saints offense tomorrow night, I would say Deonte Harris, just a guess. And it really could be any of these guys. If I had to rank them in terms of confidence, it'd be Harris 1, Callaway 2, Smith 3. But once again, I'm going to stay away. I don't really want to have too much to do with the receivers in a Taysom Hill like QB situation.
All right, so let's wrap up here. We've got just one tight end to look at here, and it's Dalton Schultz. So nothing on the Saints side. And again, you can't load up on Kamara or anybody else. It's one prop per player. So if you're looking at Dalton Schultz as far as any type of angle, he also is questionable coming into this. 45.5 receiving yards, 4.5 receptions. So let's look at this two ways, right? Cooper's playing, or in the rare event that Cooper's out.
Well, if Cooper's out, then I think we lean slightly towards the overs on Dalton Schultz. But or else I have to look at our projections we have here. And let's just say these are accurate numbers that have been set by No House Advantage, because we have for receptions, Dalton Schultz projected for 4.44. His number on NHI is 4.5. The receptions number on No House Advantage, like you said, 45.5. We have Dalton Schultz projected for 45.7 yards. When I just see numbers that are that close, we've got a handful of guys to pick from. I'll look elsewhere.
All right. Same thing with both categories, or just receptions. Sorry.
No, it's same for both. We basically have the identical projection to what the prop is.
Awesome, brother. I think we finally got everything in on time for the first time. Maybe we're improving here. By all means, we get 2 thumbs up from Tyler and a clap. I love it. Make sure you're following along here. Greg's on Twitter at Ehrenberg DFS at Shander Show. For me, we never promote Tyler's Twitter. What's your Twitter? You should put it out there on the chat. No,
no, he doesn't want. I followed Tyler once on Twitter. He's like, you should not do that. I was like, all right.
Oh, are you going to go down some like ridiculously crazy rabbit hole? Oh, deactivate. Smart man. I am envious of you that you've deactivated your social. Trust me. All right. Thanks again to NHA. Remember, use that promo code Awesemo, AWE. It is. You're right. AWE SEMO. And we're going to match your first deposit up to $25. All we ask, hit that thumbs up button, subscribe, and follow Greg on Twitter. Damn it. Will you? We'll see you next week.